Hey YouTube, EnjoyBoy here. So today I want to talk about ELBAF, and so this is going to be a major correction to my first reaction to the last chapter of One Piece, which was chapter 865, in which I failed to notice pretty much the most obvious thing that was, I guess, could be qualified as subtle from the last chapter. It's times like this that I'm really appreciative of my foresight, calling my videos, titling them first reactions rather than reviews, because I don't spend a lot of time looking at the chapters. I read the chapter and I give you my first reaction. And so guys, that aside, you will notice, a lot of you noticed, that I missed the huge fucking tree in the last page of chapter 865.
Wait a minute. Disappointed!
So yeah, let's correct that. And so for those of you who may be as blind as I am, in the very last chapter of One Piece, we actually get to see a little bit of ELBAF. And in the terrain, you can see off to the side of the left panel on the right side, there's this huge giant shadow. And I think the consensus is that this is some kind of tree, just because it has the general look of a tree. Now this isn't guaranteed to be the case. Could be a giant rock formation, for instance, but a lot of people, myself included, really think it is just a tree. And so if this does end up being a tree, this is another huge win for the theory community. That is because of all the islands that have ever existed in One Piece, of all the things we've speculated about future islands, one thing that was almost a consensus regarding ELBAF is that we would find a tree there, a giant important tree. I think the oldest speculation on the topic of the idea that there might be a great tree located on ELBAF suggests that the treasure tree Atom might be there. And for those of you who don't remember, treasure tree Atom is actually a legendary tree whose bark is said to be the hardest in the world and was used to build the ships the Oro Jackson of Gold D. Roger and of course the Thousand Sunny. Here's a clip from an old video from Alpha Too Late in which he essentially speculates something else, but mentions within this video that he believes that this tree would be located in ELBAF. And so to see this giant, shadow, tree-like thing located in ELBAF really validates this particular theory. But I will say that this theory really doesn't have a whole lot to substantiate it, right? It's just, it has really hard wood, it would be difficult to chop down, it would make a lot of sense for giants to be the ones to harvest the wood. But guys, it's not as simple as, well, this tree must be Treasure Tree Atom, because there are two other very persuasive theories which also suggested that there might be a great tree located in ELBAF. The first one that I want to talk about is Giant Jack. And so if you guys don't remember, Giant Jack was actually a beanstalk-like tree that traversed through the Sky Islands. And so when you read through the story of One Piece and you don't put too much thought to it, you would just assume that Giant Jack is a beanstalk that somehow grew out of the Sky Islands. But you must keep in mind that plants do not grow in the Sky Islands. Plants grow out of soil and, or as the Skypians would call it, verth. And so the clouds can help support plant life, but plants don't actually grow out of it. And so I think for the vast majority of One Piece readers, there's one of two things that are likely to be true. Either they just assume that Giant Jack grew out of Shandor, or really haven't given it much thought whatsoever. But when you actually ask the question, where does Giant Jack originate from? At what point did it grow out of the world? The answer is almost very clear to me, and that is it can't have possibly grown out of Shandor, because as we know, Shandor was thrust up into the Sky Islands by the knock-up stream. The island was sort of torn apart, and we can actually see what happens to it, and it gets flung up into the sky where it actually lands on the pre-existing Giant Jack. So Giant Jack didn't grow out of Shandor as it appears to do when you look at most images of Shandor up in the Sky Islands. It was there beforehand. And if we establish that this pre-existing giant plant must have grown out of actual soil, then is there another giant bit of earth up in the Sky Islands? Does that seem really likely? Keep in mind that for Shandor to stay up into the Sky Islands, it actually had to land and get conjoined with Giant Jack. If Giant Jack had not been there, it seems very likely to assume that it would have just fallen back to the Earth through the various layers of the clouds. The White Sea and the White Sea would have gone through all of those things because it could not be supported otherwise. And so if we keep in mind the size of Giant Jack and how much soil would be required in order to sustain it and for it to grow, it seems incredibly unlikely that there is another soil-based island was thrust up into the Sky Islands that would be of enough size to support Giant Jack. So Giant Jack probably doesn't originate from the Sky Islands. And so if Giant Jack is up in the Sky Islands, but it could not have originated from the Sky Islands, then where possibly could it originate from? And the answer to that is very simple: the actual planet. Yes, Giant Jack, this beanstalk-like plant, is so large that it originates from the actual Earth. It travels all the way up 10,000 meters into the sky to the Sky Islands, where we see it and where it's still capable of holding up half of an actual island. And so now that we've established that Giant Jack is really likely to have originated from the actual planet, what island does it draw its roots from? And this is the theory that ELBAF is the home of Giant Jack. This was first theorized by Beck and perhaps popularized on YouTube by Theory2. So I think the first thing that I need to say is that I think a lot of people would assume that Giant Jack grows straight up into the sky. But if you actually look at the way the world is formatted, right? ELBAF is in the New World and Jaya is in the Paradise portion of the Grand Line. So the Straw Hats landed in these Sky Islands, presumably very close to Jaya. Obviously high up in the air, but close to it. And it wouldn't seem likely for Giant Jack, since they see it there in the Sky Islands. It doesn't seem likely that it originates from ELBAF, if it grows straight up into the air. So the first way that could potentially explain this is I'm going to show you a clip from Theory2's video. So the idea is pretty simple, that the island just literally traveled the length of the Grand Line. I'm not a big fan of this particular idea, but it is definitely possible. And obviously Theory2 went more in depth than just this to help substantiate this particular idea. But I believe something different. Giant Jack grows up from its point of origination, but its branches extend along the Sky Islands. You can actually see a portion of Giant Jack extend out from under the island of Shandora, and it does so horizontally rather than vertically. In fact, it even is used to support the roadways as well that interconnect the Sky Islands of Skypiea. We can even see what appears to be multiple small branches as well, because they are lined on either side of the roadway, thus giving at least some bit of evidence towards the idea that this beanstalk-like plant actually does contain branches, and if it does contain branches, then there could be a main mast of the actual plant with the branches extending in all directions throughout the Sky Islands. And so despite what we're led to believe that Shandora actually landed on the main portion of Giant Jack, that could merely be a branch. And so if you have a tree that is large enough to have branches that are capable of holding up islands, this tree would be humongous, and it would make a lot of sense for that tree to be located very far away from where the Straw Hats initially landed on the Sky Islands in Skypiea, which was presumably close to Jaya as far as, obviously 10,000 meters up, but still close. This tree could be located in the New World. It would make sense. But some people may argue that beanstalks do not possess branches, and I'm not a beanstalk expert, but when I googled it, certainly they don't seem to usually contain branches. So the alternative idea to this is that Giant Jack originates from the New World, but literally the tip of it, when you get to the very top, it actually bends. And so it bends throughout the Sky Islands, so literally it's like leaning towards the top, and what we see here is the very tip of Giant Jack, but it originates far away in the New World. Now, with this plausibility established that potentially this Giant Jack beanstalk originates in Elbaf, why would people speculate in this in the first place? And the idea goes back to a very popular fable called Jack and the Giant Beanstalk. And already you can see the potential parallels because this beanstalk is in fact called Giant Jack. And in Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, Jack climbs the beanstalk, and living in the clouds at the top of the beanstalk are giants. Giant Jack. And so given the relationship between beanstalks and giants in this very popular story, then it would make a lot of sense for this Giant Jack beanstalk to have some relation to giants. And we plan on visiting Elbaf. Elbaf has this giant tree. It could very well be Giant Jack. And to make this idea even more interesting, Gonfall even mentions an easier way in order to reach the Sky Islands. The Straw Hats reached it via the Knockup Stream, which literally baffled Gonfall because he didn't realize anyone would be brave enough to try that. There's usually people appear from the other side of the world through this unknown method called the Gate of High West, or the Summit of High West. And so if you're imagining possible scenarios in which it may be easy to reach the Sky Islands, keeping in mind again 10,000 meters above the sea, all the way up to potentially even 17,000 meters above the sea, in what way could this even be possible? And it would be definitely possible if there was a large-ass tree people could climb in order to reach the Sky Islands. They could climb Giant Jack. This again could be another homage to Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, where Jack climbed the beanstalk to reach the giants who lived up in the clouds. And so if it's true that the beanstalk in some way relates to the giants, there's two possibilities. One is that the giants actually live on the island from which the beanstalk originally sprouted, as would be obvious to assume. The other one, and if this would be true if it was more closely related to Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, the giants of Elbaf actually live in the sky above Elbaf. And the third possibility that I can envision, which would be actually a nice segue into the last thing that I want to talk about, is that just the royalty, the giant royalty of Elbaf live in the sky, and the rest of the giants live actually on the main island on the sea called Elbaf. And the reason why that this is a very legit speculation is that Oda has based giants on Norse mythology. This is true from Odin to Loki, the names themselves, as well as their in general appearance is highly reminiscent of Vikings who believed in Norse mythology. And so actually guys, there's a very interesting giant tree in Norse mythology called Yggdrasil. And this tree actually holds up the world of the gods Asgard. And now that we know that the kings of Elbaf are called Odin and the prince called Loki, which are Norse gods, it would make a lot of sense for the royalty of Elbaf to live up in the sky, on this tree which symbolically represents Yggdrasil. And if the island in the New World is indeed called Elbaf, it would make sense for there to be giants from Elbaf, separate to those that live in Asgard, quote unquote. But let's ignore the speculation about Giant Jack for a moment and just speculate this simply. What if the tree that we see in Elbaf is simply put Yggdrasil? This is also something that has been speculated an innumerable number of times. The most recent of these, I believe, is from my good friend Red Hair Ragnar, but it's a very old idea. And I think the most interesting thing about potentially speculating that this tree that we see in Elbaf is Yggdrasil is in fact Yggdrasil's alternative names. It is also called the World Tree, and in other stories, the Tree of Life. And so this is where things get potentially crazy. Now, this is something I've said before, but I'm going to say again here as quickly as possible, but there are several great trees in the world of One Piece. In Ohara, we have the Tree of Knowledge. There's Treasure Tree Adam, and Sunlight Eve Tree. And so Eve, Adam, and the Tree of Knowledge are all references to the story of creation, Adam and Eve, from the Bible. And so it's really interesting for Oda to have chosen these names specifically for the great trees in One Piece. But knowing this, it actually leaves us with two potential speculations for other great trees which might reside in the world of One Piece. So Oda turned Adam and Eve from the story of creation into trees in the One Piece world. Then it would make sense for other characters from the story of Adam and Eve to also potentially be trees as well. And the character that I'm referring to here is the Devil. And if the Devil has a tree in the world of One Piece, it would make a ton of sense for it to be called the Tree of the Devil or the Devil Fruit Tree. But the other speculation, the one that I really want to focus on, is that there was another tree located in the Garden of Eden that was named, and this tree was called the Tree of Life. And it seems as though scholars and theologians debate hotly about many aspects of the Tree of Life, so do not take everything that I say as 100% fact. However, there is a very popular interpretation of the powers of the Tree of Life to mean something along the lines of this. Man was furnished with food against hunger, with drink against thirst, and with the Tree of Life against the ravages of old age. So simply put, guys, it's possible that the Tree of Life grants immortality. And so if this were to be the case, and the Tree of Life actually exists in the One Piece world, and we have Norse mythology and Yggdrasil being the located on the home of the giants, and for all of these things to come together, Yggdrasil could be interpreted by Oda as the Tree of Life, and thus produce fruit or something along that lines, which grants someone immortality. But guys, with this awesome speculation explained to you hopefully in a way that was understandable, I gotta say I don't believe that. And the main reason is I really like the theory about Giant Jack. And so the crazy thing about using inspirations to potentially predict One Piece is that Oda, despite being inspired by things, we don't know exactly how he will be inspired and in which direction he might take his inspiration. So it's very clear that the giants are based on Norse mythology, and if this tree actually exists in ELBAF, then he was additionally inspired by Yggdrasil. However, the Yggdrasil in the One Piece world does not have to be the Yggdrasil from Norse mythology. Oda is not being forced to make every aspect of ELBAF 100% equivalent to Norse mythology. So my personal belief is that Oda actually combined the stories of Jack and the Giant Beanstalk and Yggdrasil to create the actual truth of the One Piece world. In my interpretation of what's going on here, Giant Jack grows out of ELBAF, and that is what we see from the shadow. However, this is also Oda's Yggdrasil. And so when you combine Giant Jack and Yggdrasil, what's interesting is that there's a lot of connections that can be made. First of all, Yggdrasil from Norse mythology connects the 9 worlds of the Norse cosmos. And so from what I've already speculated here, I believe that Giant Jack actually extends along the Sky Islands and potentially even connects them. Maybe there are or were 9 major Sky Islands. And it's also stated that the branches of Yggdrasil extend far into the heavens. And just as I speculated earlier, the branches of Giant Jack extend far into the Sky Islands, also called the Heavens. But you never really know, guys. Perhaps Oda goes for a 3-for-1, where Giant Jack is actually in ELBAF. It also produces fruit, which grants immortality, while also representing Yggdrasil. We just can't know. This is one of those situations where differentiating between the best ideas out there is incredibly hard and completely up to your own personal preference. If you tell me in the comments, I believe that it's Treasure Tree Adam that we see in ELBAF, I can't hold that against you because it does make a lot of sense. I just think that given the reasoning that Giant Jack must come from the actual Earth, and that it extends all the way up to the Sky Islands so that potentially people can climb up Giant Jack to reach the Sky Islands, it is just too similar to Jack and the Giant Beanstalk for us not to consider its potential relationship to giants. But going back to what we saw in the last chapter, it is definitely extremely strange that we get to ELBAF and the first thing that we see is this giant shadowy structure. And for sure, I definitely think we're going to discover what this is within the next couple of chapters, and you gotta know, I am very, very curious. Joy Boy's salivating over here to know more. But anyway, guys, that's all I really want to talk about today. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree with anything that I said or disagree with everything or with particular things. Just let me know what you think. Like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.